Bismarck once said, those who like sausage and those who like public policy should not watch either being made. Boy, if this isn't a good example of sausage, I don't think you'll ever see one.
If we stop producing today, it would make absolutely no difference to the global emissions picture.
I've toured the Syncrude labs. There's been a lot of improvement in energy use, and there's a lot of improvement in water use, but that's just the beginning of what could happen if driven by some sensible policies.
We need that resource, and I think we should keep on developing it. I know of no poor country with a good environmental record. I know of no poor country with a good education record, and I know of no poor country with a good health record.
There's certainly not one person in this room or in the industry who'd want a government to decide which projects were merited to go ahead of others.
If the oil sands are operating at current levels and reduce the amount of water used and reduce the amount of energy per barrel of oil, you'll be producing for a long time.
We need a Canadian energy strategy, not a Canadian energy plan. I already got fired and laid off for that game. I want to talk about a Canadian energy supply strategy.
This is an important debate. It's important for my kids. If my kids would get off their butts, it would be important for my grandchildren.
This is an idea that was born a number of months ago. We put a bunch of names on the table, and I'm happy to say that all the names we put on the table agreed to come and participate in this. So we feel very fortunate.
We like to frame this really as a discussion, not forcing people into a black and white position, but recognizing the complexity of the debate.
I believe that the development of the oil sands is reconcilable with the environmental agenda. I don't believe that they are mutually exclusive. Is this really about the oil sands, or is it how we produce and use energy? Does it make sense to single out one source? Because if you strip away the rhetoric and you look at the facts, it's pretty clear the issue is bigger than the oil sands. It's about what has facilitated economic growth over the last 100 years, and it's been, as Jeff Rubin has pointed out in his book, with cheap fuel, oil, coal, and natural gas. Well, that world is over, leaving us with, yes, the marginal barrel, and that means the oil sands. The IEA study released last week pretty much acknowledged the role the oil sands will play in meeting future demand, and there is much skepticism around the numbers used from a supply standpoint in that study. The IEA is forecasting production to increase to 105 million barrels a day by 2030, while acknowledging 2/3 will come from fields yet to be found or developed. But the one major reliable source of oil in the free world remains in Alberta's oil sands. On the doors of the Palazzo Vecchio in Florence are carved two words, Festina Lente. It's a phrase I heard as a child many times as my dad tried to get me to speak more slowly. It means make haste slowly. And that is what has been going on in the oil sands since 1967, for better or worse. It's how the industry has slowly and steadily made improvements to its processes that have not only decreased production costs, but also the impact on the environment. Last summer, I stood in a field of bison and wandered through mining sites that had been reclaimed by Syncrude. I even saw live ducks on a pond in one of the areas in the process of being reclaimed. I witnessed bird deterrent systems and had a glimpse into the research that's being done, both in real time, on site, and at the lab bench into how to better deal with tailings ponds. Arguments against the oil sands center primarily around three aspects: air, water, and land use. Let's go first to the issue of atmospheric impact. First of all, Canada's 2% of global emissions. The oil sands are 5% of Canadian emissions, 0.5% of US emissions, 0.1% of global emissions. 1/10 of global emissions come from the oil sands. There's been a 30% reduction in emissions since 1990, half due to technological advancements. In other words, if we stop producing today, it would make absolutely no difference to the global emissions picture. Now, some might call this a nihilistic perspective, but I call it realistic. The bigger issue is the GHGs generated by consumption. It's transportation, it's electricity and heat. In my mind, the oil sands are not the problem. It's how we build our cities and generate electricity. My question is not about the oil sands, it's about coal-fired power. Where are the NGOs on coal that accounted for $62 billion in healthcare-related costs in the US because of the nitrogen dioxide and sulfur dioxide? Coal-fired power, we know, is the biggest source of greenhouse gas emissions, and what are we doing about it? Well, if you believe Senator John Kerry, we're going to make it clean. We're going to use carbon capture and storage. The US is going to be the Saudi Arabia of clean coal. I have two thoughts on that. One is that clean coal is an oxymoron. The second is that carbon capture and storage is akin to giving methadone to a heroin addict. You are still not addressing the underlying problem of addiction. Alberta is not doing any better in this department. The province is the second largest per capita emitter of greenhouse gases after Saskatchewan. Why? Because of the coal-fired power. And the current philosophy of the Alberta government is entrenching this, not changing it. The reality is that life cycle emissions for oil and gas, for oil sands, are comparable to domestic and imported conventional crudes. It's the life cycle, it's the wells to wheels measures that we have to focus on. California thermal is worse for its greenhouse gas emissions than mined and upgraded bitumen and in situ oil sands production that is not upgraded. The only oil sands product that exceeds emissions produced by California thermal is upgraded bitumen from in situ production. Water is another area we focus on, and again, the oil sands is unfairly targeted. 5% of water allotment compared with, yes, 45% for irrigation, 31% for commercial use. And here's an interesting thought. Alberta is as arid as the Arizona desert. Agriculture makes up a sliver of the provincial economy. Doesn't make sense to use that much water for agriculture-related irrigation. That one is a political minefield. And let's talk about what the energy sector's done to conserve its water use. Imperial Oil has reduced the amount of water used from 3.5 barrels per barrel of bitumen in 1985 to half a barrel today. And it recycles more than 95% of the water produced with the oil. The industry does use less than its allotted amount. In situ production, which will comprise 40% of oil sands production by 2020, will use less than half of 1% of Alberta's water allocation. The in situ producers use something called brackish water, which isn't suitable for anything, and they recycle it. 85% of it, in fact. So, from that perspective, the industry has made great strides. The Athabasca River cuts naturally through the bitumen reservoirs and has always had measurable levels of naturally occurring oil sands derived hydrocarbon compounds. It seeps into the river. That's just the way it works. The size of the area currently under development is half the size of Edmonton, not what some people like to say, the size of Florida. 12% of mineable area has been reclaimed since 1960, and there's so much more in progress. But because the time frame of the projects is so long, the reclamation process takes a lot longer, and the number is actually much bigger than the 12% that is talked about. Imperial's Cold Lake in situ project is progressively reclaiming 67% of the disturbed land, and 22% has been permanently reclaimed. In situ doesn't disturb as much, but it still has to engage in reclamation. Devon Canada has developed a process to reduce the footprint of pipelines on the environment in their region. The company also uses wood fiber roads that doesn't require the removal of topsoil and allows the surface to quickly return to its former state. The health of the boreal forest, despite what people want us to believe, is intact. 94% of the living resources are undisturbed by the activity in the region. The good news is, this is a young industry. It was born in 1967, and it has made great progress since then and will continue to do so. The oil sands used to be all about the economics and increasing operating efficiency. Mining processes have gone from using drag lines to using trucks and shovels. Operating efficiency is much higher. GPSs are used to track trucks, and technology is used to make sure that the steps are all in sync. We've had so many innovations: cyclic steam stimulation, SAGD, transportation using certain pipelines. Now Suncor's experimenting with a mobile mixing tank that would further save on fuel and reduce the carbon footprint. There are solvent-based technologies currently being experimented with by Encana, Suncor, and Imperial Oil. Companies have improved processes. They've dropped energy consumption by 1/3 by using cooler water to separate heavy oil from the sand. There's something called the vapor extraction process. The use of solvent, which uses solvents, and the use of solvents could eliminate the need for water, make the recovery of bitumen much easier and reclamation faster. That, not carbon capture and storage, might be the silver bullet. There's also the tide process, which is a fire flood underground. Capri is another one that's in process. When you start looking at all the technology, all the scientific experiments that are in process in real time in the field, you realize the oil sands industry is making progress. It's continuing to make progress. They've become an easy target, but when you look at what's been achieved so far with the increases in production, it's actually quite remarkable. The dead ducks on the tailings ponds didn't help, but the world would be better served if the NGOs focused their attention on other fuels and other practices around the world that are doing more damage to the environment than Alberta's oil sands.
And so completes my speech. Thank you, Deborah. First, let me say thank you to the Calgary Enterprise Forum for serving that methane belch and carbon sink destroying four-legged CO2 delicious beast. It was excellent. And Elizabeth, let me say personally, and I'm sure, although not elected anymore, I can say welcome on behalf of all Albertans to step into here. There are a number of people who agree with what you say, and there are some that maybe disagree a little bit. So, but one thing that Alberta does is it respects renegades, roues, and rogues, and they've always respected the ability to have different opinions. They've always had the ability to respect new thoughts and new ideas, because the oil patch is born on innovation. There's no such thing as a stupid idea in the oil patch, because you just don't know what's going on down that hole. So I want to welcome you, and thanks for being here tonight. I think it's just a great idea. I'm basically oil patch trash through and through. I saw my first drilling rig when I was 7. My brother was in the business. He's a geologist. I like geology so much I took it twice in university.
It's been a great experience. I've roughnecked, I've worked seismic, I've owned drilling rigs, I've owned barite mines, and I got to tell you, I don't meet any better people than what are in the oil patch today. And I think that's a great salute. And it's the kind of people that are driven towards innovation. They're driven towards doing something different. They're driven towards partnership, because nobody can afford to take all the risks by themselves. And it was a great, great privilege to represent this fabulous industry for the period of time that I did. I particularly grew up looking at all the reports that said we had 4% of the world's oil reserves. And I knew that, in fact, was wrong. We had much, much more. And so when Neil McCrank from the ERCB phoned me one Saturday morning, crisp, cool, fall Saturday morning, said, I think you might have something you might want to see here. And it was a report done by an economist and a geologist working together that showed 56,000 wells and 6,000 cores. Cores are all stored up in the research center, that definitively said we can lay claim to 174 billion barrels of oil. So that started the progress to get the recognition of these resources, because I knew with recognition would come investment. And if there's one thing this industry needs, it's money. And if you just read faithfully, as I do, Deborah's column, you can see how important investment is to this business. And sometimes we as Canadians don't do a really good job of creating smooth investment channels for us to be able to invest in our own businesses, our own commodities, and our own resources. We look abroad and we look overseas and we look internationally. So we've had, I think, a tremendous amount of investment in our product, and we've always been good at what we do. I can safely say that of all the people I've met in the oil patch, I would classify every one of them as an environmentalist, because we all wanted to leave what we found equal to or better than. We work in the land, we work with it every day. I mean, there's so many farm people and so many ranchers and so many people from rural Alberta have worked in this industry that, you know, we do care about it, and we care about it a lot. It's worth fighting for. So we'll do that. And I think that what you hear from a political side, some of it's informed, some of it's probably misinformed. Very difficult decisions, because you actually have to spend money on this. But I think that, as Deborah pointed out, there are pathways that we can find. There's a terrific graph of the Livermore Institute in Berkeley. It says that we use half the energy we produce to move the energy that we use to where we use it. If you just look at that 50% number, just think what you could do with energy efficiency. And if we double our energy efficiency in the oil sands, it's going to make a tremendous change in emissions. And I'll declare my conflict right up in the front. I sit on the Hatch Engineering Advisory Board, and they are a large investor in a technology called Ensolve. Ensolve is a warm propane solvent that doesn't use water. It doesn't use natural gas. It has an 86% reduction in emissions, lower CapEx, lower OpEx, lab proven. It's John Nininger, the inventor, an MIT PhD. You know, this is the kind of innovation that will drive to this oil and gas industry. And frankly, I'd like to see us produce 3, 4, and 5 million barrels a day up there, because I think we can do a better job than any other place in the world in terms of managing that. We manage our business here better than anybody else in the world. We're the best handlers in the world of sour gas. We invented horizontal drilling. What we've done with 3D and now 4D seismic is unbelievable. We're truly innovators. And with that innovation comes energy efficiency and comes a kinder, gentler footprint into the environmental side. I'm certainly not defensive about what we've done. I'm very proud of what this province has done. And I can tell you, I know of no poor country with a good environmental record. I know of no poor country with a good education record. and I know of no poor country with a good health record. So we need that resource, and I think we should keep on developing it. Thank you.
Well, thanks very much for having me, and I want to share some of the sentiments of Deborah Murray in saying this is a great opportunity, and I'm very honored to have been invited by the Calgary Enterprise Forum. I certainly know where I fit on this equation, where minds and money meet. I don't have any money, so I really hope that I represent something of intellectual capabilities. I'm here on behalf of a lot of Canadians who are worried about the oil sands, but I wanted to let you know right away that my objective here this evening is to figure out on how many things can we agree. Is the ongoing development of the oil sands ultimately irreconcilable with an environmental agenda? I just wanted to question a little bit about why we're calling it an environmental agenda. Because if you grasp the science of the climate change issue, and the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change has done tremendous work with only the peer-reviewed scientific literature that's worth something to be examined, then we're not really talking about an environmental issue. We are talking, as the Pentagon recently recognized, that we're really talking about a security issue. And in that context, we do recognize that to respond to the growing changes in the chemistry of the atmosphere, and those are demonstrable and documented back through a million-year climate record of atmospheric chemistry that comes from Antarctic ice core data, we know that we have already, as humanity, changed the chemistry of the atmosphere. Certainly, we don't have the all clear to continue on a business-as-usual trajectory, nor should we. The kind of information we receive, as I mentioned, the Pentagon just said that the climate crisis represents a larger threat to global geopolitical security than terrorism. So we're responding to something quite in the nature of a clear and present danger. I just imagined myself for a moment in front of a room, say in 1985, when we were debating what we should do about chemicals that were reputed to be destroying the ozone layer. Now, everyone knew that the ozone layer was what made life possible on planet Earth, because without it, ultraviolet rays would reach this planet in such intensity that it would be impossible to grow crops and it would be impossible to maintain life. So it's a rather large issue, maintaining the ozone layer. Back in 1985, people in industry, particularly those who manufactured chlorofluorocarbons, did not want to agree that the ozone layer was thinning, nor did they want to agree that if it was thinning, it had anything to do with their products, nor did they think that it was economically viable, that they should be part of a solution. I put that to you because even with people like Don Hodel, U.S. Secretary of the Interior, saying we didn't need to do anything about the ozone layer, we just needed broad brim hats and lots of sunscreen. DuPont saw that there was political will. There's a complicated interrelationship between political will and technological innovation. DuPont rose to the challenge, and by the time we signed the Montreal Protocol in 1987 in Montreal with leaders from around the world, a session that looked much like what Copenhagen will look like in 19 days' time, a United Nations negotiation about a global environmental issue that threatened survival, but which required some significant economic shifts. DuPont was in the front of the line to sign with a smile on their face because they had worked hard to come up with the alternatives. So the challenge in the oil patch is to rethink being oil and gas companies to being increasingly energy companies and seizing the enormous opportunities that are out there. Because what is presented in this challenge is the single biggest economic opportunity in the history of humanity. The ultimate end point around fossil fuel use and the global atmosphere is a gradual phasing out of dependency and indeed addiction to fossil fuels, which, as Deborah quite rightly points out, is only partly at this point in a minor way related to the tar sands. It's related a lot more in Alberta to burning coal to produce electricity. We do not in the Green Party focus on one sector at the expense of others. We're looking for solutions that make sense for the whole country, and indeed, Alberta is a big part of the solution that lies ahead. So how do we get there? We're going to be making a shift. Our position is, I think, roughly the same as the Mayor and Council of Fort McMurray or former Premier Peter Lougheed, that as we go forward, we need to go slow. So that go forward slowly and quickly scenario makes a lot of sense here. Very few environmentalists are really nostalgic for Brian Mulroney's government, but I am. You look back and you say, we were in the lead then on climate change. Or you can look back in Alberta and say, Peter Lougheed pioneered, this province pioneered in saying, let's set aside the profits and the royalties from non-renewable resources into a heritage fund, and let's build that up. Norway followed Alberta's example. The Norway Heritage Fund now has $400 billion in it, while Alberta's has $17 billion, because somewhere along the way, governments that followed Mr. Lougheed lost the sense of sensible planning, an appropriate response to resource development, paying attention to all sectors, making sure that even within the oil and gas sector, natural gas could take its place and development could happen, and that we weren't all in this province subjected to what Mr. Lougheed calls the traffic jam, and I know you all live with it, of elevated prices, shortage of labor, the difficulty of building a refinery anywhere near the bitumen. Doesn't make a lot of economic sense, and it certainly didn't make a lot of environmental sense. So we're looking at this and saying, as a political party, as Greens in a province that frankly have tremendous strength here in grassroots support, we get a very good vote in Alberta. There's a lot of common sense reason that we should live within our ecological limits, just as we live within our fiscal limits, and policies that go against those principles tend to lead us to bad places we do not want to be. I agree with much of what Murray said. Energy efficiency is the low-hanging fruit here. This is a country that wastes 60% of the energy we use at every level. We can fix that. We can capture that CO2 more easily than anything else out there. And we need to ensure that we put in place some sensible planning, which starts with a moratorium and works towards the day when our economy, in all of its implications, as Deborah said, is not addicted to wasting fossil fuels. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions from the floor? Yes.
Just to clarify, Elizabeth May, is the Green Party against the oil sands?
We are in favor of a moratorium on the development of new projects until such time as the kind of technological achievements, which I know can be made. I've toured the Syncrude labs. There's been a lot of improvement in energy use, and there's a lot of improvement in water use, but that's just the beginning of what could happen if driven by some sensible policies. A moratorium moving forward towards less water intensity, less energy intensity. If you've got an EROI of 3-to-1, this is not good. So we can do some work on that. And we should do that work before we expand.
Do you really believe that all these innovations and all these changes in favor of the environment would really have occurred on the goodwill of the oil companies, or really are pretty much the result of a very strong public challenge to the damage to the environment that was being produced by the oil companies?
When you look at how the development of the oil sands has proceeded since 1967, the companies themselves have made those changes to make the projects themselves economic. There's no question. It was all about producing that barrel and making a bit of money at it because it was very capital intensive. It started to progress, and the realization was that there was indeed a footprint that had to be mitigated. People who live in Alberta respect the land, and they're not about to leave the land in a desecrated form for the sake of profit. Sir, I don't know if you've been up to the oil sands. I don't know if you've walked those reclaimed mines. It's quite astonishing to see what's being done right now. And I think that it's a bit cynical to suggest that the only reason that there has been reclamation and advancements in technology made is solely because of public pressure. Public pressure does play a role, or profit. I think it's about a respect for where we live and trying to leave the world in a better place than how we found it. Have you been up to Fort McMurray? I suggest you do that.
Well, I have, and the amount of reclamation is very small up to this point. We've only got 1 square kilometer of land that's actually been certified as reclaimed. I know there can be some good work done in reclamation, but I also know that without strong regulations, without incentives in that area, and without a stronger provincial infrastructure that makes sure that happens. I mean, I have much less criticism. Just be fair with this group of you. Just say it right out loud. Far less criticism of industry in all this than I do for the Alberta government that has let a lot go on without regulation, without oversight, without accountability, and without transparency.
The Alberta government has been in for lots of criticism, and both on either side of the natural resource issue, but we were the first government to have a Department of Environment in all of Canada. We were the first regulatory body that when we saw gas being burned off in Turner Valley and then subsequently in Leduc, that the role of the Energy Resource Conservation Board is world level. When Martha Kostek out of Rocky Mountain House sat on a joint committee with government officials and determined that flaring and venting could be stopped. I grew up with flares in many parts of Alberta. You don't see a flare here often. Surface venting has been minimized. The Alberta government has a strong record and a record it can stand on. The path of $147 oil that was lasted for 2 days created a great piece of attention towards Fort McMurray. That is the last non-sovereign controlled reserve of oil deposits in the world that can be developed, and I think it's responsible. I think the government did fall down in terms of the infrastructure argument. I think that's a reasonable point. Highway 63 and the city of Fort McMurray could have been bolstered. And is that mine?
Murray.
I hope it's not somebody named Ed Stelmach saying, "What are you doing?" No, it's the guy from Washington, Gary Mars. But, I would much rather let a regulatory body working in partnership, and believe me, we are a partnership because we collect royalties from the oil and gas business. We're a partner, we're a regulator, we're a policymaker. My experience in government, that we had some very difficult tasks to do. I don't apologize for the mistakes. I think we learned from some mistakes. But I also think that we did a pretty darn good job given the resources that we had.
Starting to see great contributions start to move from the academic community, Roger, which I think is important. We've got chairs in asphalt and bitumen and environmental science throughout. They've been very generous donors from the industry. And I think we've developed now a level of academic intelligence that we can use.
My wife is from Fort McMurray originally. I've taken a quick look, and personally, I agree with what Murray is saying about Highway 63 and the development. Did we make a mistake as a province with building too fast? Is this not common sense? Because we have an incredible resource. Why are we abusing it so quickly?
I'm a visitor to Calgary, to the Petroleum Club. I want to be respectful to all of the experience that you all have had. But when I hear Peter Lougheed say that it's gone too fast, that we've created a traffic jam, that you can't build the refineries near the resource, and you could if you'd planned it properly, that the infrastructure that he had put in place should not have been dumped, I think that's pretty interesting information from a former premier of this province, who I think represented an approach to policy making more in keeping with what we would have done in those circumstances.
If there's one person in this province who doesn't need anyone to defend them, it's Peter Lougheed. But I think we have to be careful in interpreting Premier Lougheed's comments about the oil sands as being shaped by a determination to maximize the endowment that Alberta has in terms of natural resources, and to too quickly see that as a condemnation of the oil sands, I think would be a fundamental misread.
Roger, I don't think I did that, and I appreciate your
No,
clarification.
you just sort of...
No, I'm
It's
very
easy to
careful. I'm
imagine
very
that.
clear that I would not describe Premier Lougheed as someone who didn't want to see the tar sands and oil sands developed.
Good.
But he certainly has been a strong critic of how it has been done.
Yes.
We have a prime minister, and in Murray's case, a former minister, enunciating a policy goal of we want 5 million barrels a day, or Jim Flaherty saying it in China. And yet, when the political voices say it, quite often the industry says, wait a minute, that's faster and more, and why, and we don't think we can do that. Why is that a policy goal? Is 5 million barrels of oil a day from the oil sands a goal? Wouldn't the goal be a sustainable economy for Alberta for the long term from a diversity of industries, including maintaining an agricultural base, encouraging other energy sectors, making sure renewables can take off here so that we have some wealth and some technology to export? I mean, there's a whole range of policy goals. Why is it that our federal government, in the absence of any energy policy nationally at all, chooses one goal? Now I know if someone's laughing, they're thinking Trudeau. I'm just saying, we are the only country in the OECD with no policy around something as significant as energy planning. And we should have a policy, and certainly it should not simply be the goal for one sector in one area of a province where the people who live in that area are the ones crying out, slow down.
I have a few thoughts on this. In response to the overheated pace that was going on in Fort McMurray, Adam Smith invisible hand was starting to work and activity was starting to slow down, productivity was decreasing, companies were rethinking what they were going to do and how they were going to proceed. And even before the oil price crashed and before the bottom fell out of the economy and the market, people were already starting to pull back in terms of what they wanted to accomplish up in the oil sands. There are market forces, whether we like it or not, that are going to dictate the pace of development. There's certainly not one person in this room or in the industry who'd want a government to decide which projects were merited to go ahead of others. That's just not what Alberta's about. That's not what this entrepreneurial province is about or the energy sector is about.
In the early 90s, when oil was less than $30 a barrel, and the tar sands weren't, oil sands were not, we were calling them tar sands then, so I can be forgiven, it's a historical anomaly, we're not yet producing very much. It wasn't the marketplace, and solely, yes, there's entrepreneurial instinct in Alberta, but it also helped that Jean Chrétien dropped a couple $2 billion here. It also helped that Ralph Klein dropped the royalty rate to 1%. It also helped that in 1996, Chrétien created an accelerated capital cost allowance to drive development. Those things made sense as an investment when oil was less than $30 a barrel, but it certainly would be revisionist history not to note that industry and government worked together, and that without absent government intervention, it would have been a much longer time, who knows when, we would be getting 1.3 million barrels of oil out of the Athabasca region.
I think we'd all acknowledge that there has been a collaborative undertaking by government and industry to produce Alberta's wealth.
My question is for Murray. You've represented Alberta internationally and are no doubt aware of the media scrutiny that we're seeing from other parts of the world, specifically Europe, about the quote-unquote tar sands. How well prepared do you think we are, or the industry is, or the government is in Alberta to handle this scrutiny? And what needs to be done, perhaps in order to prepare ourselves more for the inevitable onslaught of the NGOs, et cetera, that we're starting to see now?
When we cut through the swath of the need to feel the daily white sheet of the newspaper, you'll note that shipments to the United States have increased over the past year, in spite of the debate over the low carbon fuel standard debate, dirty oil, in spite of the Mr. Obama, please don't buy our oil. Our shipments continue to increase. We've seen multi-billion-dollar investments in Keystone and Clippard in order to get product to market. There are billions of dollars being spent in retrofitting refineries in Wood River, Detroit, BP Whiting, Borger, Texas, Lima, Ohio. And in fact, oil sands is part of the U.S. economic recovery program. President Obama knows full well that over $2 billion of those 797B trucks that come out of Peoria, Illinois, are going to go to the oil sands. So there's an economic discussion that is made. It's made by representatives of industry, and in some cases by governments. I've done some work in London and some work with the IEA in Paris on it from a European perspective. And of course, you know, you look at the work of Total, and I mean, Statoil, they're investors here. BP's an investor in Alberta. We have investment from all over the world, not to dismiss the close to $7 billion worth of investment from China. And, you know, we're landlocked. We're 777 miles from Tidewater. So what happens is, as we go through the white sheet of filling the word and watching journalists print much about the environmental condition of our production continues to grow. We continue to sell it, and we continue, I think, to do a good job in stewardship. Now, I think what we have to do is more, and I think that we have to see that the resource belongs to Alberta, but the opportunity belongs to Canada. And I was in Halifax. I had somebody come up to me and say, thanks very much for the work in the oil sands. And he said, I send $4 million worth of valves up there every year. We employ 35 people here in Halifax. The oil sands are very important to my business in Halifax. We import over 1.3 million barrels a day in eastern Canada from Algeria, Kuwait, the North Sea, Norway. If we were to take some of that refining capacity and do the same thing as they're doing in the United States, instead of propping up bankrupt auto companies, put those skilled workers together in retrofitting refineries, using this new pipeline capacity that can get our oil down to eastern Canada, I think we could certainly change our balance of trade, our payments in that, and we can certainly create more jobs. And I think we can do this being more energy efficient and being less carbon creative. The bottom line is, I think there will always be a debate against the use of hydrocarbons, because I believe the environmental movement in the United States really wants to cut off hydrocarbon uses as much as they can. The oil sands happens to be a convenient example. Why do they demonstrate there? Why do the guys go in and sit on the tailings pipes and put up the signs? Because they can. You try this in Venezuela. You try this in Iraq. You try this even in Mexico. If you go out and hijack something in the Bay of Canarell, I'll tell you, you're not going to get served coffee by the operator and escorted to a warm place and thanked very much for your sign. And that is a freedom worth defending. The defense of environmental freedom, the freedom to demonstrate, the freedom for association, the freedom to disagree, that's what democracy is all about. The debate over the speed of development of these oil sands, that's important. But I really do think right now that we do, and I agree, that we need a Canadian energy strategy, not a Canadian energy plan. I already got fired and laid off for that game. I want to talk about a Canadian energy supply strategy. Why aren't we sending 500,000 to 700,000 barrels a day down east? We've got opportunities in this great country that we ignore at our own peril, and that's the part that worries me both about governance and about policy. And I think there's lots of discussion that we should form a Canadian energy bipartisan, multilateral organization that talks about these things and addresses those questions that you put forth, address them head on. I'd encourage you to go to CanadianOilSands.ca. I think much of this war is fought on the web. I would actually direct people to tar sands and dirty oil and then put factual information in there for a change.
My organization actually tracks international coverage of the oil sands. And what has struck me is the relatively modest to light coverage. We pick up about 450, 500 unique stories a month from the international press, from environmental blogs, from environmental websites, from the mainstream press. That's not a huge amount of coverage.
Is there one thing that we can get all three people to agree on?
There are no in-house research labs anymore. The collaborations that are being struck, funded by, in large part, the energy companies themselves at the University of Alberta and the University of Calgary, the collaboration between the universities on the research side. I think it's really important to know that we are moving ahead and that we're going to be moving towards this common goal of sustainable energy, environment, and the economy, and try and bring those we're working towards bringing those elements together. I do agree with Murray and Elizabeth. We need a national energy strategy. It's absolutely critical, and I would argue that without a national energy strategy, anything remotely resembling an agreement in Copenhagen or some sort of agreement with the United States is not going to be possible, because we don't know what our vision is, what our view is, and how we're going to get there. And so I think that that's one of the key things that we as Albertans should be starting to think about, and banish the thought of a national energy policy. But we need a strategy. We have issues not just with the oil sands, but from an economic perspective. We have a natural gas business that is in deep, deep trouble. And without any sort of plan, we're not going to be benefiting from that resource either. Thanks very much for everyone's time.
Thank you, Deborah.
When we look for fields of consensus, I'm a conservationist. I would like to see the last molecule, the last hydrocarbon molecule that's burnt in North America before shifting over to the next fuel, to be the last hydrocarbon molecule produced in the oil sands before final reclamation and we return it to the pristine sand beaches of Lake Agassiz. I also believe that we've found some consensus on energy efficiency. And we're in the middle of a debate, the government, those elected officials, are in the middle of a debate on transmission lines. Transmission lines actually deliver carbon savings because you can have line efficiencies and cut down on line loss. One of the things that it was almost like a side effect, but we actually became one of the largest per capita wind producers in Canada when we put in competitive power generation regulations. We turned a moribund utility-driven power model into probably the best electricity entrepreneurs in Canada and parts of North America. So there's money in energy efficiency. Dig into the science. I'm not a scientist. I'm not going to comment on it. I'm plowing my way through Ian Plimmer's book, Heaven and Earth, with great interest. But join in the dialogue. Think about being involved from a public policy stuff. I mean, Bismarck once said, those who like sausage and those who like public policy should not watch either being made. Boy, if this isn't a good example of sausage, I don't think you'll ever see one. And I laud Elizabeth for being involved and having the strength to say, I'm prepared to put myself out for your vote and for political representation. And believe me, all you have to do is look at the stub on your paycheck, not to realize that the government is an important part of your life. And so you better be an important part of theirs. Thank you.
Well, I also think we can start on a number of points of agreement. Murray's mentioned one, the importance of energy productivity improvements, the importance of having a focus on how do we go at demand side management in this country such that we really can deliver on factor 4 energy improvements so that you end up with being able to do twice as much using half as much energy. That's within our reach. Post-war, we improved labor productivity. We need to do that now with energy productivity. I think we also agree that there needs to be some form of public policy around energy so that it isn't a pell-mell process without any real definition of goals. And I also think it's implicit, but let me make it explicit. I think it's really important to have conversations and discussions and dialogue in contexts where people don't think such things are possible, because as Canadians, we're really good at finding what we agree on. We're just very rarely given the opportunity to do so. So it's my first invitation to the Petroleum Club. I hope it won't be my last. I really appreciated the chance to talk to you about all this. I also wanted to say, though, that I want to thank the government of Alberta for listening to my dear friend, whom I miss, Martha Kostick, when she worked so hard, and she loved Ralph. She always loved Ralph. I never quite understood
Ralph
why
loved
she
her,
loved.
too.
I know. He loved
Ralph loved her.
Yeah, and Martha helped to get a lot of people to figure out to stop flaring. Here's some ideas for what we could do from here. If Alberta wants to turn it at 180 and be seen as a carbon hero in the world, because by the way, it's not just a bunch of U.S. environmentalists who want to shut down hydrocarbons. That's the advice from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. Those are the targets of the European Union, the state of California, and the Obama administration. 80% below 1990 reductions in greenhouse gases by 2050. Sweden's the first country to say it's going off oil, but it will not be the last. So it's important to figure out how do we manage this transition, and from your point of view, how are you, like the big multinationals, and a lot of you were in the room, but certainly it was the head of the Shell hydrogen division who quoted Sheikh Yameni saying, look, the Stone Age didn't end because we ran out of stones. And the fossil fuel era isn't going to end just because we've run out of fossil fuels, but because we found something better. So I just want to close with that thought that we can do a lot together. Alberta could take the technology used to shut down flaring here and help shut down flaring in developing countries, particularly in Nigeria, where most of greenhouse gases are coming from waste, venting, and flaring. You could help by deciding that carbon capture and storage, and at least at the billions of dollars level, which it is now taking out of the federal budget, could be better spent on shutting down coal plants in Alberta by using Albertan natural gas and giving the natural gas industry in this province a hand. And it could be helped by making a commitment to really create the kind of policy kickstart that Germany gave to renewables, which has now created 400,000 new jobs in Germany. Alberta could do that. You could be the clean energy province. And if the oil sands are operating at current levels and reduce the amount of water used and reduce the amount of energy per barrel of oil, you'll be producing for a long time. Thank you.
So on behalf of the Calgary Enterprise Forum, I wanted to extend a very warm thank you to all the panelists, as well as to Roger for agreeing to participate in this debate. The Calgary Enterprise Forum is a non-profit society. However, we have about $500 that we wanted to donate to the University of Calgary Institute for Sustainable Energy, Environment, and Economy. I'm going to ask Catherine Brownlee, also a member of our society, to accept this on behalf of Professor Mansell. Thank you very much. And we hope to see you again at some time in the near future. And perhaps we will be able to turn this into a regular event. Thank you very much.